Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us. I was thinking about kind of a two-part episode about decisions and the fact that as survivors, we have to make a lot of decisions about things that are very uncomfortable. When you look at it in comparison with most people don't have to decide.
Wow.
What we have to talk about is so difficult, and we have to make these decisions about who we're going to talk about with, what we want to talk about and why, and all these other decisions. And then I was thinking, well, what makes it so difficult is our expectations and our expectations of what's going to happen. And part of that is because most people don't have to deal with this, don't have to talk about, don't have to go to therapy for something that traumatic that happened to them. So if they do go to therapy, then how do they explain to people why they're going to therapy and so forth? And I feel like a lot of the difficulty with these decisions is because of our own expectations. And I know for me, a lot of what I expected would happen didn't really happen the way I expected it or to the degree that I expected it. And so as I got older and dealt with it more and more, I realized my expectation level eased up a lot. I didn't expect a lot out of all these things that all these decisions that I had to make. They weren't as overwhelming because I realized I didn't expect as much to happen or something serious to happen.
Can you give like an example?
I think, well, just recently, having those men here that knew I was a survivor, and my expectation was how they were going to treat me, but the way they treated me didn't even come close to what I expected. And so talking about with that one guy at the very end wasn't a big deal at all. But I know before I actually talked to him about, or before, my expectation of how it was going to go, it's still, you have these expectations that it's going to be weird, or they're going to be disturbed, or they're going to treat you weird. And it didn't happen that way.
That's so interesting because it also brings up that element of being guarded where we want to be real, we want to share, but also like we had talked on one episode, somebody who just shared inappropriately with everybody.
Yeah.
And so you're right. It's a whole different level of stress.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of it is due to our own expectation.
Mm-hmm.
I think as I got older and dealt with these decisions more and more, I realized I still had this expectation of things being, but it usually wasn't that way. I always thought it would be harder to talk about. I always thought I would cause more reaction. I always thought people would react differently or treat me differently because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it still feels that way a lot of times, but it doesn't usually happen the way I expect it.
So let me ask you this. I hear what you're saying, and what I'm thinking about is you talked about as you've gotten older. So after this last experience that you had, do you feel like something in you has shifted that is going to make it easier the next time, or do you think you'll still have that apprehension?
Both. And I know that because it's happened over and over. It does get a little easier every time. But the expectation or the apprehension, I like that you said that because that's a big part of it, is the apprehension of something being disturbing or something, disturbing someone. And I still have that apprehension, but the more experiences I have, the more I realize I don't need to have the apprehension. it doesn't usually happen the way I expect it will, that will be disturbing or upsetting to someone or upsetting to me or and so forth.
And when you say I don't need to have it, this is so curious to me because there's things that we don't want to do or feel, and you're saying I don't need to have that. But is it so ingrained in us, or is that something you can actually do something about?
Well, I feel like the more experiences I have has improved my expectations and has lowered my apprehension
Mhm.
considerably. And I know every time I go through an experience of having to face the decision of talking about what happened to me, that it does make it easier each time.
Mhm.
And so, but it's a process that, I think we go up and down on. Sometimes it's way easier and sometimes it's harder and for different reasons than before. And I think it's because, the more we do talk about, the more we do share, we're in different situations. We're sharing with different people. We're sharing and, it's a whole new experience almost every time, it feels like.
Mhm. And do you, when you're apprehending it and you're feeling like, are you feeling like, so you have this expectation about how they may respond,
Hmm.
but how are you feeling? Are you feeling broken or less confident? Or is it just you feel the same about yourself? You just are, because we all do that. We all worry how people will respond to things. But I'm curious if it stirs that I'm broken or I'm not worthy in you, or if it's just solely about what they're thinking.
I think the hurt is still there sometimes. And so I do feel like sometimes it's hard to share because it is something that was really tough to go through.
Mhm.
But I also feel like when I'm sharing in a way that can actually help someone or can actually encourage or even comfort someone, then it doesn't feel that way. It kind of depends on the setting, on where I'm sharing and who I'm sharing with. If the intention is to comfort someone, if it's someone that I feel like so they don't feel alone or they don't feel that pain or that shame, then it's easier for me. But if it's just sharing in general, just,
Mhm.
because the topic comes up somehow, then I have that bit of apprehension, that bit of feeling of, yes, there was something wrong with me,
Mhm.
it feels like. And I think for me, though, it is in the past. There was something that happened to me. There was something that I went through. So it's not as hard. I don't feel like it's in the moment, which, when I was first starting to talk about it, it still felt very present. This hurt, what happened to me was something that was still a strong part of me, and it felt present, like I was still hurt, I was still wounded, I was still damaged.
Mhm. Because what I'm thinking and what I'm hearing is it's really like PTSD. So when we share and our amygdala is being stirred, and the reason I'm thinking about this is because my niece and her head injury, and she's home now.
Oh,
And my
good.
brother said, we're going to go for a walk around the neighborhood tomorrow. Now, my brother has not done counseling. They've told him about the head injury, but I was like, you realize even if she doesn't remember what happens, if she's in that environment, she's going to feel like she's right back there that night. She could be triggered. And so what we're talking about really is PTSD. And so what I'm wondering, I mean, I don't have the answer to this, but it sounds like so in the beginning when you would share the PTSD, the amygdala was like, it's happening now. And then you're like,
Hmm.
wait, it's not happening now. But as you're getting some space and you're sharing more, it's almost like your brain is going, oh, he's just talking about it. It's not actually happening. So something about repeating and telling your story begins to ease that. Am I
Yeah.
off track
No,
there?
that's actually totally on mark. That's what it feels like. And that's what the progression felt like. It went from
Mm-hmm.
being so present in the moment
Mm-hmm.
and so, talking about brought it all back up.
Right.
And now it's more like it was something that happened to me. And yes, it's hard to talk about, but it's not something I can't talk about. It's not something that's going to affect me as much as it used to.
Mhm.
And
And that's the reason for all the secrets and the silence, is because it is so hard to talk about.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that was the other side of it is it's so hard to talk about because of our expectations. But I think you're right too. It does bring up stuff.
Mhm.
And that's why these decisions that we have as survivors are so difficult because it's not just a choice. Okay, am I gonna tell someone about and go to therapy? Am I gonna go to the police? But it's also when I tell someone about it, it's gonna feel like it's right there.
Mhm.
And I think you're aware, you're cognizant of how overwhelming it is just to talk about. And so it's so hard to make that decision to talk about because you're afraid you're going to just be overwhelmed and not handle it. And at first, that fear of being overwhelmed is just enormous. And even after you've talked about it a few times, it still feels enormous
Mhm.
until you kind of get to that place of realizing that it was in the past. You're not going through it by just talking about it. It's not going to necessarily bring it all back.
Yeah.
So,
I've had women say to me, I can't tell this story because I'll cry and I'll never stop. And
mm,
I remember that feeling. Now
yeah,
I just smile, but I remember that feeling of
yeah.
if I have to really face this, I am never going to recover. I'm never going to stop crying. I'm never going to stop feeling bad. And I remember my counselor saying, you will run out of tears. I promise you. You'll stop crying.
Well, and for men, it's hard because we don't let ourselves get
Hmm.
overwhelmed by emotion. I mean, that's just not somewhere we go generally. And even sometimes we get excited or wound up about stuff, but to be feeling that emotional, just that overwhelming emotion and expressing that emotion is just really hard for men.
Yeah.
But I think we do, it serves a purpose. It's important to go through that emotion. It's important to have those feelings. I think the decision is hard because we have this expectation of how we're going to feel. But once you get through it, it makes it so much easier to handle it. But it just that first time of having that overwhelming emotion and getting through it, I think our expectation is we'll never get past it. It'll just overwhelm us forever. But that's not what happens.
I have a friend in AA, and I remember it had been like 10 years. And she looked at me because we had run into some people. And she looked at me and she goes, Do I have to? Because they had admitted they were struggling. And she goes, do I have to tell my story? And I just looked at her and I said, I don't know how this works, but you're in the program. And if it's going to help somebody else, then you don't have to tell your story, but it is in a way the same. And I remember, Kevin, I give you kudos for always being willing to share your story, even when it's hard, because we both know of a podcaster, pretty famous. He threw out that he had been abused as a kid. And then he basically said, don't contact me. I'm never talking about this again. And he totally slammed the door.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his option if he doesn't want to talk about it. But
Yeah.
here he had really made a connection with so much of his audience. And then he just withdrew. He's like, I can't.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to have compassion for him because he was vulnerable and he shared. But then he just withdrew in such a hard, strong way and said, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Nobody comment. Nobody say anything to me. So the fact that you're willing to be vulnerable and to put yourself out there that is really something.
Well, I think it changes us and it changes us for the better. It changes us in that we recognize that we don't have to keep having that recurring feeling of being overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
We can get past it. And part of it is by telling our story and
Mm-hmm.
going through that process, the grief process,
Mm-hmm.
getting past the shame process, all the steps we have to take.
Well, and
There's so many, but
it's spiral. So I remember one time when you'd done a podcast or shared your story and you kind of went, oh my goodness, I thought I was past this, but it was really, you were just at another circle around it. You had done so much work, but in your heart, in your mind, you felt like I'm back at step one, but you weren't.
yeah,
But it felt like that,
yeah.
and I think that's where we can get stuck.
We do get those surprises. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of the process is uncovering all of that because it's important to get through these emotions. It's
Mhm.
important to get through these feelings. It's important to bring them up. It's important to recognize them and not be completely blindsided by them all the time. And that's how we get through them is to recognize them and be in them. I think just being in that feeling isn't always great anyway.
Mhm.
And yet you grow from it. You've done it, you acknowledge that feeling, you know where it's coming from. And I think that's the important part is when you're in that feeling, finding out where it's coming from, what it's about. And then you have knowledge about what is happening to you, why you're having those feelings and where they're coming from and being able to recognize, well, that's not something that I'm going to have to deal with all the time. I can actually, handle this right now.
Right. We
And
recover quicker.
yeah.
It's kind of like, so today I had to go to the Social Security office.
Mm,
And oh man, I was standing in line and I didn't know if I could just drop stuff off. I didn't know what to do. And then I had to go through a kiosk and I had to sit and wait. But now I know the process. So next
yeah.
time I go, I'm going to go a little earlier. I'm going to maybe make an appointment. Like as we go, we learn and it gets easier. It doesn't mean we don't still have to deal with it. It just means that we can actually deal with it better.
Yeah. Yeah, we get the learning curve. And that's where the learning curve happens is by it going through the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think it's not really fair that we have to make all these decisions. There's a lot of decisions we have to go through that aren't great decisions. Who are we going to talk about this? How are we going to explain that we need help, that we need therapy?
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to deal with if it comes up somehow? All these decisions that are difficult, but just meeting them and handling them rather than avoiding them gives you that learning curve. And you start to learn that it's not as hard as you thought it would be. And it gets easier. And you're not going to be as overwhelmed every time you do it. You learn that
Mm-hmm.
you can deal with it without being completely wiped out.
Well, and also I think what we learn is one is boundaries. So we don't have to tell everybody everything.
Mm-hmm.
So some people are curious. They're like, oh, talk to me. Tell me. I want to know your mess because they want to know and care. But other people are like, oh, tell me. I want to know your mess. Like
Mm-hmm.
they want to use it against you. So there's this thing about boundaries of that we get to decide who we tell. We don't have to tell everyone if we don't want to. And also that we sometimes there's someone we want to tell, but maybe the situation isn't right. But
Yeah.
because, so we go, oh, I'd love to talk to you about that, but can we do that later? So it's boundaries and facilitating because we do still have to protect ourselves, but we don't want to be, they used to call it in recovery, sinful self-protective, which we're so self-protective, we don't let anybody in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like being self-protective to a point and finding that fine line of vulnerability and protectiveness, because the Bible says we don't want to throw our pearls before swine. And so I think that is really interesting because there is a time and a place.
Yeah.
And I know that there was a time when I didn't think I thought whatever, if for instance, growing up, I thought if a guy liked me, I had to like him back. If anybody asked me something, I had to tell them. I didn't know I had agency to say, I'm not going to talk about that with you. Or
Mm.
because, and I didn't have the intuition as a young person. Now I have more intuition. I might be talking to someone and I'm like, oh, what are they getting at? Is it
Mm-hmm.
innocent? Oh, I want to know, or is it, I want to hurt you? So I think as we age and we do this, we get a little more insight and intuition, but boundaries is something that we were never allowed to have as a victim. And
Yeah.
so as we're reinstating those as a survivor, it's kind of part of that, I think.
Yeah, and that is where we don't want to just trauma bomb someone either. We don't want to just dump on them. And you learn that by experiencing what happens when you talk about it, who you talk about with, and if you're, being careful about it, you're not going to necessarily be trauma bombing them. So I think the decisions are difficult, but I think we can make them less difficult if we try not to have the expectation that it's going to be just overwhelming,
Yeah.
because that makes it so hard
Hmm.
to make that decision, because we're just too overwhelmed by what we think will happen.
Hmm.
And then as we do start taking steps, we learn from those steps. We learn that we can handle it. We can handle so much. And I think at the beginning you have to be careful how much you share and who you share with, of
Hmm.
course. And that's the learning curve. But the first decision to do it is so hard.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's so daunting,
Hmm.
but there's so many reasons why we're not
Yeah.
sure how they're going to react, and we're not sure how we're going to react.
And
Although
we're still not quite sure in the beginning if it was maybe really was our fault.
sometimes, yeah, we might not be sure if it's our fault, or
Yeah.
if we're just, if this is something that really happened, or are we sure it happened? I mean, there's so many things going on until we really dig into it.
Hmm.
But for me, learning that my expectations were so out of whack with what really would happen helped me a lot.
Hmm.
I know I was able to control my emotions. It was hard at first, but after a while, after the first few times, I was able to control my emotions depending on the setting. If I was in therapy or in group with people I trusted and people that knew my story and cared about me, I could express my emotions all as much as I was feeling. But I also knew that when I was sharing with people that, I didn't want to just melt down with, I could control my emotions. It wouldn't be as overwhelming. I could handle it in a way that wasn't going to traumatize myself or traumatize someone else. So learning that my expectations were a bit more exaggerated generally, or very exaggerated.
Well, and sometimes we might, for me, I was very stoic. So I would say some things that were pretty horrendous with no emotion.
Mhm.
Because it just wasn't connecting with me. It wasn't like I was crying and so then people look at you. And I often think when Amanda Knox, remember when she was in Italy and was accused of murder, and they kept saying her affect was flat. Well, she was a 21-year-old little girl who was being accused of murder.
Yeah.
And she didn't know how. At first, it was ridiculous. And so they caught her laughing, which she wasn't laughing at the situation, but her
Yeah.
affect wasn't in line. And so they misread that. And
Yeah.
so that's another thing that our affect might show up unexpectedly, and that can catch people off guard as well.
Yeah, and I think way we react is something we haven't experienced until we actually talk about. We don't know how it's going to come out. We
Mm-hmm.
don't know if we're going to melt down. We don't know if we're just going to be monotone and
Mm-hmm.
completely unemotional, or we don't know if we're just going to completely melt down.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of the expectation. What is gonna happen if I do this? Is
Yeah.
it gonna? And so the expectation is what scares us the most. We just
Mm-hmm.
don't know
Yeah.
until we start taking the steps. And that's
Right.
why I think when you're thinking about it, when you're thinking about who to talk to, whether to go to counseling, try not to be overwhelmed by your expectations, because really we don't know what's going to happen. And it's generally not as overwhelming as we expect.
Mm-hmm. And in a way, isn't that kind of fear? It's like, they say fear and excitement is the same emotion, actually. And if we thought everything was going to go great, we wouldn't have that
Hmm.
anticipation. But in a way, it's as though we're thinking it's going to go bad. So then we have that fear, that nervousness.
Hmm.
So, which is the expectation. I'm expecting they're not going to respond well to this.
Yeah. And I think what helps is maybe instead of just looking at what you think's going to happen, try to focus on if I do get emotional, what's the worst that can,
Oh,
be? I'll embarrass myself. Rather than look at the dire consequences, look at that it probably won't change things that much.
It's
Now,
not the end of the world.
yeah, it's not going to be the end of the world. You're going to be able to deal with whatever fallout there is. And the fallout isn't as bad as what you've already been through. You know, what you've been through is a lot worse than what you're going to have to deal with generally. At least for me, it was. I think for most survivors, it's the expectation that scares them. But then once they start talking about it, then once they get counseling, it's not easy, but it's not as hard as they expected. And it certainly wasn't as hard or as bad as what they went through. So it's so worth it to take that first step, to take the plunge, find out what it's like. Just don't dive in head first, just put your foot in the water, test the water a little, and you'll find out it's not as bad as you thought.
Yeah, that's so good.
But I think what stops us is we imagine all these terrible things happening. And if we can just instead think, well, what's the worst that can happen? It's really not going to be that, and if people don't believe you, then you've learned something about them. And if people try to use this against you or people disown you or all these things that happen, at least you're learning about those people because of this that you didn't know before, learning things about them you didn't know before, that they don't really trust you or they don't believe you or they want to question you about it or blame you, then you're learning there's something about them that they don't believe in you.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Wow. Decisions.
Decisions. Well, I know it sounds weird, but I was thinking, one of the hardest things about being a survivor is deciding what you're going to do about it. Who you're going to tell, who you're going to talk to, if you're going to get counseling, how you go about getting counseling. I mean, if you're, married man with kids and you decide you need counseling, well, it's kind of hard to just do that isolated. You have to, your wife's going to know about it. Your kids are probably going to find out all these things, all these decisions. How are you going to handle it if the kids find out? How are you going to handle it if your coworkers find out? All these things that you have to think about. How am I going to deal with this? And it doesn't seem fair because it's not our fault that we have to deal with this. But I think a lot of people who survive traumas and even you think about gay people, when they have to decide to come out, that's a decision they have to make that most people don't have to go through. Yeah. And how they handle it and how other people handle it, it's a lot like being a survivor and deciding you need to deal with this. And all of a sudden it starts involving other people. And that's kind of the problem with being a survivor and having to deal with this is you're not dealing with this all by yourself. You can't just do it in a little private place and handle it. It's not something you can just do by yourself generally. You kind of have to share with others what's going on.
Yeah, and that can be tough. And again, I think if we know in the beginning, we have the right to only tell who we want. Like we don't have to tell everyone we're going to therapy. But then as we do it and we realize how wonderful it is, then a lot of times it's like a lot easier. And, here's the thing, Kevin, most people aren't curious. So if I say, oh, I'm in therapy, most people won't even ask why. So we think people are going to care a lot more than they do. I worked with a gal, she was on a pretty famous radio station here in Seattle, and she was going to a meetup, and she goes, well, I don't think I'm going to tell them what station I'm on because, in radio, especially in the old days, you had to worry about stalkers and that. And I laughed. I go, I bet you if you tell them what radio or that you're in radio, they won't even ask what station, because she was worried, do I tell them if and so the next day she came back and she was mad as a hornet. She's like, I said, I work in radio, and not one person in that whole group asked me what station I was on. And I was like, yeah, people are not curious.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I know my expectations always were a lot more exaggerated than what generally happened. And it's true. People, I don't know if they're not curious or that they don't care. I think it's mostly they don't want to step out of a comfort zone.
Yeah.
Or they're self-absorbed, so they don't always want to pay a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So it is surprising. I know for me it was a lot of times it was very surprising how what my expectations were and what actually happened, how completely different it was, and how different in a way that surprised me, and that, geez, why did I even worry about this? Why was I even stressed?
Yeah. Don't we waste a lot of time on stressing over things that will never
Mm.
happen?
Yeah, or don't
We,
happen the way we think it will, or
yeah. Yeah. Well, if I say this, they'll say that. And we write the whole story before it's ever happened. And then it just like
yeah, yeah.
doesn't even, it's not a novel, it's a
It's a
sentence.
sentence. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's so true.
But yeah, and sometimes I do feel like that. All the stuff going on with my family,
Mm,
it's kind of put me back into survival mode.
mm,
And I think there's a part of me that thrives there. I've done
mm.
all this work to not be there. And then I recognize, oh my goodness, I'm back in survival mode. And so I see it coming out in some other areas. And so I'm paying attention. I'm like,
Mm, mm.
oh, it's really easy to revert
Yeah,
into, oh, everything's terrible and it's never going to work out and the world's coming to an end. And then that's a level of stress that we don't know. But, families go through cancer, they go through brain trauma,
yeah,
and they walk through it, and we can walk through it. So I don't think like I've reverted to childhood, but I did recognize that it has thrown me back into survival mode. And I had to really recognize that and go, oh, I don't have to live in survival mode. Even
yeah,
though my family's going through trauma, we can all walk in the present. And yeah, it's going to be hard and sad. And some days are good news and a lot of days are bad news, but we walk through it.
yeah.
I can walk through it. I can do hard things.
Yeah, well, and that's perspective is so helpful because you've been through it, you can get through it, that you've gotten through stuff, and so you're more prepared to handle things. And I think it's good that you realize that you did go into survival mode, because I think we always, often fall back into things when stuff starts getting difficult, when there's some kind of trauma or drama going on.
Yeah.
We go back to that place of fight or flight or
Yeah.
panic or freeze or all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And as we get more perspective, we realize, oh, that's where this is coming from. It's because this is happening. That's why I'm handling things like this. I don't have to handle them like this because I know the world's not coming to an end. We just have to handle the situation, and I'm able to handle the situation because I've been through this kind of stuff. So I know we can. It's not going to be great. It's not going to be easy, but I know we can get through this.
Yeah. But I think it was surprising for me when I recognized it. It was like, oh, that's why I missed that meeting. That's why I haven't paid attention to an email. Like all these things were happening. And I was like, why is this happening? And I'm like, oh, I'm actually ignoring some important things because I'm stressed out. And then I was like, oh, okay, I don't have to do that. I can open my email, because sometimes I'm like, I can't deal with this. Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Just open the email, see what you need to respond to, and then it's okay. Take a breath. But it's just funny to me how it's easy to start self-sabotaging and doing all the things, even when I've done all the work. It's like, but once recognized, it's an easy recovery. For me, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And without doing the work, though, you'd still, it takes a lot longer to recognize, and it's a lot harder to realize what you're going through when you're going through that survival mode.
Well, and you might not. And that's the beauty of recovery, of getting help, is that we can begin to recognize the things we've done to sabotage or that might actually make our life harder. One of the things they say in AA is we're as sick as our secrets. So if we're keeping a secret, it makes us sick. We've talked about that. So when we're willing to get the help and let someone in to walk through this with us, even if it's just a counselor, maybe we don't go to a big support group or whatever, but that when we're willing to get the help, then when we do face things in our life that are difficult, we can go, oh, I recognize what's happening. If we're not in counseling anymore, we might call our counselor and go, hey, I need a freshener up, or, So that's the beauty of being in recovery and being a survivor rather than a victim, because being a victim in survivor mode can be very terrifying. Being a survivor in survivor mode, we can get a handle and we can do the next right thing.
Yeah, yeah. And all comes from perspective and experience. And that also is where, our expectations start to become more realistic. I think if you haven't had the experience, if you haven't gone through the process, your expectations are going to be so out of perspective, so distorted. So because you don't have that experience to give you perspective. But that's why it's so hard to make that first decision to talk about it to someone, to tell your story. But
and when you experience some grace, somebody saying, oh, I get you, or I've been there, or I'm sorry that happened to you. When we experience grace, then I think we want more of that. And then that will start to alleviate those expectations, because we'll be like, oh, I haven't experienced grace, or anybody saying, wow, I'm sorry you went through that. It's just like, I'm broken. This is my fault. Everyone is going to be mad at me. We've written a story that isn't true.
Yeah. And then you can actually experience the freedom of talking about it, the freedom of getting help, the freedom of sharing your story, and even helping others.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, we left it a couple of weeks ago that you were going to go to your coworkers and ask them what they thought of you. Did you do that?
No, I haven't done that yet. Work's been kind of crazy. So I was thinking about it, but then it's been a crazy couple of weeks. So yeah, it can still happen.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it in your box. Well, this is where we give you the chance to opt out or pray with us.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for all your blessings. I praise you for your blessing of our choices when we are walking with you, that you give us the spirit that searches for you, that wants to please you, that wants to be with you. And I just pray for your help for those who are listening, that you will help them with their choices and decisions, and that you will bless them with your presence so that they won't feel overwhelmed. Lord, I just pray that you will comfort them so the choices won't feel as drastic or scary, that you will show them grace in their lives so they will feel like they can handle the decisions they need to make, that they won't be as hard or overwhelming as they think they will be, and that they have the strength to get through this, that you are with them and you want to give them strength to get through this and give them the courage to do this, Lord. In your name I pray.
And Father, thank you for recovery. Thank you that we don't have to stay in the victim role, that we can be a survivor. It doesn't make it go away, but I know for me, sometimes it's hard because I see how some people recover and I think I should be recovering like them. And I know that for each one of us, it's different, but it really does seem like the first step is telling someone and breaking that silence. And that can be so terrifying. And even as we move on, there might be a prompting to share with somebody because maybe they're going through it and they're feeling so alone. And so as we walk this journey of recovery, I pray that you will just help us to know what we need to know for whatever's next, and that we won't obsess over the past, or we won't worry so much about the future, but that we might be able to just stay in the moment and let whatever is be, and that we might be able to know that we are now safe, know that we are now loved, and that there is grace and there's mercy and forgiveness and whatever it is we need to be able to move forward and live a healthy, wonderful life. In your Son's holy name, amen.
Amen.